Today's topic is about the death of the central midfielder. Now don't worry, nobody's actually died. It's just a phrase I like to use when talking about how there are no all-action midfield generals left in the modern game. When I grew up, the central midfielder could do everything. They could pass, tackle, shoot, header, and they were full of energy and box to box. But nowadays, you're either a holder, not allowed to cross the halfway line, or you're a creative number 10 who doesn't have much defensive responsibility. Now, I believe this division is bad for the game. I believe the modern midfield player gets away with too much. And just last year in commentary for Sky, Graham Souness said that the modern midfield player gets away with murder. So what's happened here? Why have they not got so much responsibility on them? And why is the modern midfield player getting away with murder, as Souness puts it? Well, the division can be traced back to a couple of points in footballing history. The first is Claude Makelele. And Makelele was so good that they named the role after him. It's now called the Makelele role. And from there on, everybody was obsessed with having a holding midfield player. For the next decade, Spain and Barcelona dominated, using as many creative, diminutive number 10s as possible, and the modern day game was formed. You're either a Matic or you're an Ozil. And I've got a problem with that. The guys that I grew up watching could do both. Gerrard, Lampard, Vieira, Keane, they were all action, midfield generals, Roy of the Rovers stuff. So I'd like to use a couple of comparisons to highlight my point. I'll pick players from the mid-90s and I'll pick players from today's game. So my first comparison is Roy Keane versus Moussa Dembele. Now both of them play central midfield. Dembele now plays more of a withdrawn holding role, and they're both what you'd call central midfielders. Now Roy Keane was not known for his attacking qualities. He was primarily known as a tough tackling, combative, defensive midfielder. But on several occasions, Roy Keane scored 8 or 6 goals in a season. And that's more than Moussa Dembele has managed in the last 5 years. More goals in 1 year than Dembele has managed in the last 5 years. Now that is quite staggering. Like I said, I've picked that example because Keane is not known as an attacking midfield player. And he still scores far more and contributes more than Dembele does. And nobody would argue that Keane didn't provide better defensive cover. So it seems that Keane is doing twice the job that Dembele is doing. Another comparison that I'll give you, an even sharper distinction, is Paul Ince versus Mesut Ozil. Again, Paul Ince, known for his tough tackling, defensive qualities. In the mid-90s, he scored 7 goals from central midfield for Inter Milan. And remember, this was at a time when Inter Milan were playing in the toughest, most defensive league in the world. Serie A was unanimously the best league in the world. Ince got 7 goals from midfield. Last year, Ozil got 5. I mean, that is absolutely staggering. Ozil has almost no defensive responsibility at all. Ince was primarily a defensive midfielder, and Ince still contributed more in an offensive manner than what Ozil did. So what's going on here? Why are these guys getting away with murder? Well, like I said, there's a division between holding and playing in the number 10 role, and we just don't demand as much from our central midfielders anymore. It's just too easy for them. They only do half the job that Gerrard and Keane and Vieira and Lampard used to do. And just on that, the reason I think it's been so bad for the game, when was the last time you saw an absolute Roy of the Rovers performance? I mean, we've got Keane, famous in '99 away at Juventus, Gerrard in Istanbul 05. Gerrard's also got an FA Cup final named after him. But when was the last time you saw a midfielder grab the game by the scruff of the neck and win it on his own like that? It just doesn't happen anymore because we don't give those guys that demand, that responsibility. They can do half the job and then pass on responsibility to someone else. We've become too obsessed with the holding midfielder. I mean, let's look at Granit Xhaka. How is Granit Xhaka even a professional footballer? The guy picks it up off his centre-halves, passes it out to his full-back, and his job's done. Oh, and if he's got enough spare time, he might run around and kick a few people and get sent off. So I don't believe the distinction's good for football. I believe that people are getting away with too much. Just on Gerrard, by the way, it's worth noting that when Benitez came to Liverpool, most people agree that Gerrard was probably the best central midfield player in the world. But as soon as Benitez came in, he told Gerrard to stop running so much. Right? Now this links me to an interesting point. I wonder if there's a cultural preference from the British people where we want this all-action midfield general. Benitez said to Gerrard, you need to hold your position more, be more like Xabi Alonso, let the ball do the work. And that's an interesting cultural preference from Benitez there. If we look at the continental midfield players, Pirlo, Xabi Alonso, they were much more likely to hold their position and let the ball do the work. But as I'm saying, in this country, we're used to all-action stuff. Gerrard, Lampard, Keane, Brian Robson, just before my time, Captain Marvel. So it's an interesting point to consider. I do wonder if there's maybe a cultural preference for the all-action player from the British Isles. There is one such player who I believe could fill the role of the midfield general in the modern game, and that's Paul Pogba. Pogba has all of the attributes that I mentioned before, but you regularly hear debates about what is his best position. Now again, I think he's a victim of this division between the holder and the number 10. I don't think it's Pogba's fault. He should be allowed to stand in the middle of the park, win the ball with his strong physique, dominate the game with his range of passing, and go and join in with the attacks and grab 6 to 8 goals a season, just like the guys in my generation did. So that's my topic for today. Do you think I'm overreacting between the division between the holder and the creative number 10? I believe that there are certain people that are victims of this division. How have we convinced Moussa Dembele that he can't cross the halfway line? How have we reached the situation when Dembele doesn't score as many goals as Roy Keane or even Paul Ince? That's absolutely quite shocking, those statistics. So how have we come to this point in the central midfield role, and what can we do about it? Pogba seems to be the man to fill the void, but even he is a victim of this division. He's being held back. He's not allowed to go and play and dominate the midfield like the guys from my generation used to. So just as one interesting survey, I'd like you to fill out in the comments box, who is the best holding midfield player you've ever seen? I said at the start they named it the Claude Makelele role. I actually believe that N'Golo Kante has now surpassed him as the best holding midfield player I've ever seen. So if you've got any other suggestions, please leave it in the comments below. But generally, Kante or Makelele, who do you prefer? So that's my wrap up for today of the central midfield problem, the death of the central midfielder. I'm glad I was around when it was Roy the Rovers, all action stuff. What do you think? If you'd like to debate me on anything about football, come and have a go if you think you're smart enough.